Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session H5 on success stories in flood risk management and communication. My name is Jessica Ludi. I'm one of two co-chairs of ASFPM's Flood Risk Communication and Outreach Committee. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you're enjoying this first ever virtual conference from ASFPM. I'm thrilled that we've had such a large number of presentations this conference on the topic of risk communication, which I think just really speaks to the increasing importance of this topic as an essential component of a flood risk management program. We've got three great speakers for you today where we're going to cover a range of topics, including we're going to hear about the Iowa Flood Center that we've all been hearing so much about. We're going to hear about flood forecasting and operations at the National Weather Service in the Gulf area. And we'll learn about the results of a large risk communication effort led by FEMA to help elected officials. We definitely want to thank all of our sponsors this year. I want to remind all of you to please use the chat box for questions, and we'll have a couple of minutes after each presentation to do some Q&A. So without further ado, our first presentation will be from Witold Krajewski. He is the director of the Iowa Flood Information Center at the University of Iowa, and his colleague Brianna Zimmerman will also be joining us. So their presentation is titled Iowa Flood Center, a Model for the Nation.
Good afternoon. I'm Witold Krajewski, and I serve as director of the Iowa Flood Center. And in this presentation, I will try to justify to you the title of this talk, why the Iowa Flood Center could be or should be served as a model for the nation. Well, so here is our short story. It all started in 2008. You see the widespreading flooding in the city of Cedar Rapids. Major disaster, also in other parts of eastern Iowa, including Iowa City, the home of the University of Iowa. Following this event, the state legislators recognized the expertise that had been resident at the University of Iowa in the form of a major research institute devoted to fluid mechanics and river mechanics, hydrology, and related topics. This institute has a history of almost 100 years. Actually, the anniversary was supposed to be celebrated soon in August. We postponed that. Anyway, the State Board of Regents established the Iowa Flood Center at the University of Iowa, and here I just highlighted some of the keywords that are included in our charge. So right after our beginning, we went to work, and here I will just take you through a few major activities. So we developed in-house a sensor that we refer to as bridge sensor. You can see why. It is a small autonomous device that measures the distance from the bridge to the water table. The device includes ultrasonic sensor, solar panel, battery, cell phone modem for data transmission, data management module, and so forth. We attach it to the side of a bridge, push a button, and data flow to our servers. So we have installed 250 of those and counting. So a couple of years ago, we solicited interest from Iowa communities, and we received about 100 additional requests. So we are in the process of installing about 30 to fulfill this request. this is how much funding we could organize. And in this case, the funding comes from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So on this map, you see a network of USGS stream gauges in green, Iowa Flood Center bridge sensors in blue, and the ones in red under development. So quite a network here, well over 400 sensors monitoring streams and rivers in the state of Iowa. They work well. This is testimony to the good engineering that we have performed. So here you can see a flash flooding event a couple of years ago in Des Moines. You see that the flood level exceeded major, flooding. There was an interruption in data transmission, but once the water went down, data gathering resumed automatically without us, doing, much. Again, we have many sensors like this. Right now, they measure only stage. We are in the process of developing synthetic, that is model-based rating, curves. In fact, I recall that last year we received an award for this, project from you, from the association. The second major activity has been mapping the inundation. So here we have two sets of maps, detailed maps that we refer to as community maps. This is an in-house developed interface that allows people to interrogate what could happen or will happen, depending on the circumstances. One can also check the water depth at a given location. And also we brought data from the HAZUS database so that you can get a quick estimate of the possible damages, here. So again, in this case, the data come from FEMA. Our contribution is to streamline, this process, bypassing a standalone GIS system. That's how HAZUS was originally designed. The second set of maps are statewide, maps. They are indexed by the probability of occurrence. They were developed over a 6-year project, following by the book, following the procedures outlined by FEMA, and in collaboration with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. They did the administrative part of the work, and we did the technical part of the work. And so these maps are available, everywhere. Again, starts with hydrography, following with USGS regression, curves for flood frequency estimation. And then the modeling and the mapping. And you can see, you can, zoom in, zoom out, and move around, and go to even, small communities and get this information. So a major, project, successful collaboration with the Iowa DNR and also the US Corps of Engineers. These maps are frequently featured at the local, media, a screenshot from a TV weathercast. Also, I have to say that many of the local media, the TV stations, and also newspapers, they have links to these maps at their websites. We also make our own real-time statewide stream flow forecast. So this seems like a competition with the National Weather Service, which is in charge of making such forecasts for the nation. But really, we are in a transition, period. The National Weather Service uses its own, technology to make stream flow forecast for a number of locations across, the nation. and is also working on a new generation technology, model-based, very detailed model-based forecast at millions of locations. Well, we have developed a similar, approach. We have a detailed model of how water flows in the landscape of Iowa, and we use those forecasts to share with the public. Now we have this policy to not confuse people that whenever and wherever the National Weather Service publishes its forecast, we do not show our forecast. We also have a close collaboration with the river forecast, centers and local offices. We share our forecast, with them. We share our data from the bridge sensors, with them. And we believe that this helps them to improve the quality of their, forecast for the people of Iowa. Well, this is in a nutshell the structure of the model. So it has two major components. We refer to the model as hill slope link model, highly distributed. So at a hill slope, we model the transformation of rainfall into runoff. Runoff ends up in a channel. The channel links form a network that you see on the right. And all these processes can be then described as a system of ordinary differential equations, nonlinear. Many of these equations, as you can see, if you integrate these equations given rainfall input, then you will have a projection of how water flows in the drainage network of streams and rivers. So in the network, there is a routing, component, a simple one. People refer to this as hydrologic, routing, but it is based on some principles of scaling of network, hydraulic geometry, and also it is based on water velocity as obtained from the data collected by the USGS. So we have, this model. It works everywhere. The main input is radar rainfall. So we have an in-house developed product, but we also use the product from the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma, called MRMS. Maybe some of you heard about, this product. So we use both. MRMS is rain gauge corrected. Our in-house radar rainfall product is not. We use a combination of those, and we make forecasts, including many of the communities where there are no gauges. So to accommodate, that situation, which is actually a challenge, how do you provide stream flow forecasts to communities where there are no gauges? So if you give people the amount of incoming waters, that they really cannot relate, to that. So we have developed, here an index. This index speaks only to the potential of flooding. It is color-coded, and river segments are coded with an appropriate, color. And then users can move around. Here I'm moving, my cursor to the time control in this panel on the lower, right. There's a PowerPoint presentation, so I didn't develop, this to illustrate this for you. But if you go through time with hourly time step, you will see the colored segments moving around. And this index simplifies the communication of information to the people. Of course, this way, through this index, we cannot provide, details. And this may be a good thing because there is considerable uncertainty in such, forecast, and all hydrologic modelers know very well about, this. So that's, I consider this a major development because it allows us to communicate what's coming pretty much everywhere. Of course, next stage would be communicating this information through maps, inundation maps in case of flooding. The National Water Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the federal center, is working on this. We are also working on this. As I demonstrated to you, we have the maps for the entire state. However, because of the uncertainty present in this forecast, we hesitate to use this technology as a forecasting tool. So for now, this index serves the purpose. Well, to disseminate the information coming from the sensors, the inundation maps, and the hydrologic forecasting model, we built a system that we call Iowa Flood Information System, web-based informatics system that is easy to use, jargon-free to the extent possible, and there is a rich set of products and ways of looking at flood relevant information in the system. You're welcome to explore it on your own. I will not go very deeply into that. I will just say that the system was recognized by the Hydrologic Warning Council, National Hydrologic Warning Council, and we got an award last year. This also speaks to the capabilities that we have in this field of what we call hydroinformatics. So there are other elements here that I don't have much time to talk about, but in essence, if you have a large monitor, you can look at this IFIS, Iowa Flood Information System, but you can also talk to an expert, a flood assistant, through these devices that we are more and more familiar with. My colleague, Professor Ibrahim Demir, he also has another presentation, not on this specific topic, but a presentation that is a testimony to the capabilities that we have within the center on these latest technologies. We leverage all these technical skills and capabilities to build a more flood resilient state. This is where we live. So we leverage this into a major project known as Iowa Watershed Approach, with funding coming from the Housing and Urban Development Agency, nearly $100 million. The project is in its fourth year. It is kind of statewide, so you see the basins that are involved. This takes us outside of Iowa City and into the field. We met many great people who are concerned about water issues in the state, and flooding and water quality are the two major issues. We go around, talk to people, organize activities, organize projects, and building small storages in the landscape, building different ways of keeping water on the landscape. Even kids like our projects, as you can see here. So we go around the state for different activities, state and county fairs, visit with different organizations, the League of Cities, the Counties Association, and many more. We also provide technical assistance to anybody who wants it. So here is an example of modeling fluvial and pluvial flooding in a small town of Manchester, Iowa, about 10,000 people. And they had problems with frequent flooding, and we did some modeling here, trying to figure out what is the role of the river, Maquoketa River, and also what is the role of the urban drainage system here. So I'm just showing this as an example of our engagement. Big cities like Des Moines or Cedar Rapids, they have their own resources. They have engineering departments. They have funding to hire consultants. So they don't have to rely on us unless they want to, and sometimes they do. The smaller communities don't have such resources, and they often come to the Iowa Flood Center, and we do preliminary expertise, for them. We don't do engineering, design level projects. We leave it for the consulting, companies, but we give our, friends in those communities the first expert, assessment, and they value this very much. Well, a completely different, service. One of our colleagues in the College of Engineering, who loves to fly, a professor of mechanical engineering, and people in the middle are from the National Weather Service, and they wanted to update the flood levels during an ongoing, flood somewhere in eastern Iowa, and we have a helicopter, and well, not we, but our colleague here, but he loves to fly, and so then he took them around, and we could explore what was going on. So this just we don't do this every day, but it did happen, a couple of times that. When we needed to survey the ongoing, flooding, we have this resource right here in Iowa City. So just flooded, areas. All of this could not happen without a very strong partnership with everybody who plays in Iowa. So this includes many federal agencies. You may be surprised to see agency like NASA, but a few years back we hosted a field experiment in support of a satellite, mission that monitors, rainfall, and with applications, to flooding. And then you recognize, many names, and my apologies to those that I omitted to include here. So I can say there's no more room, but there is always room for nice, collaboration. So, so we are very engaged in the state of Iowa, and we respect everybody else, and I believe that they respect us. So with this, one can say, so is this a model for the nation? Well, I think so, because through all these activities that I summarized, for you, the keywords are integration. We integrate the information that normally would come from separate federal agencies. USGS monitors, National Weather Service, they forecast, the Corps of Engineers, they operate. Well, and we integrate in Iowa. We integrate the federal information, so federal data, federal models with our own in-house, developed, models. We collaborate. We don't replace anybody, and we communicate. So we consider outreach a very important part of our mission and we believe that we do this effectively. So with this, I hope I convinced you that centers like this could serve other states. Our own vision towards broadening our impact is through proposing a regional center before we go to national level. And so we have ongoing conversations with the neighboring states, Missouri, Nebraska, hopefully Kansas and Illinois will follow. So with this, thank you very much, and I will be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your great presentation, Witold. We have a handful of questions for you now. One of the first ones is, what is the cost of the bridge-mounted stream gauges?
Well, the price varies whether the device is going to be in Iowa or outside of Iowa. But roughly speaking, it's about $3,500, and this is including the installation. Again, this is the price in Iowa, and then on the top of that, there is a data plan, which is just a few dollars per month.
Thank you. Another question I have for you is, how does the Flood Information Center convey ecological information in the mapping system? Is that included?
No, it's not. It's not.
Okay.
It's a simple answer.
Yeah, no, that's good. One of the questions I have is, how do you reach out to communities or other emergency managers to let them know that this great tool exists? And are there any trainings on it? How do people learn that they can come to this resource?
Well, we have been around for 10 years now, so we are a known quantity in Iowa, and people around know us, and emergency responders are our great partners. We are also known outside of Iowa, and especially in the neighboring states. So have active conversations with colleagues from Missouri and Nebraska and less so Kansas to expand the Iowa Flood Center into a regional center.
Oh, wow. Okay. Great. That actually answers part of my next question, which was, you mentioned that this could be or should be a model for the nation. And I wondered if you've gotten requests from other states saying, help us build this. We want the same thing.
I have given many talks on what we do. So there is clearly interest around the country. Perhaps most advanced is in Texas.
Okay.
So a large delegation of people from Texas came to Iowa in January, which by itself is very meaningful, from Texas to Iowa in January. And I understand that there are activities on the way with some elements mimicking what we've done. Of course, Texas is not Iowa and vice versa. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question, do you have metrics on forecast accuracy, like timing, stage, etc., and usage for the 2019 events?
Well, we continuously monitor the performance of our models. We also publish, papers on that. One of the papers was published recently in Journal of Hydrology. So this is an ongoing activity here. Of course, I cannot quote, numbers, here in this short answering, session. For one thing, the performance varies from event to event and from location to location. And we use about 140 locations monitored by USGS to assess the performance of the model. So, but I can provide this information.
Okay, thank you. We have one final question, and that is, can local communities use your models to evaluate the impacts of their local projects?
Well, if I understand, the question, correctly, our model is a statewide, model. So this is the hydrologic model, runoff model, and our mapping, system is also statewide. So it is all publicly accessible, easy to navigate, and local communities can certainly, put it to use. I will only also quickly mention that we have another very important, project, the Iowa Watershed Approach, and that project, focuses more on watershed, based analysis of hydrology and also different measures of how to keep water on the landscape to mitigate potential flooding.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica.
So we are now moving to our next presenter. We have with us Kris Lander. Kris works at NOAA's National Weather Service. He is the Development and Operations Hydrologist. Today, Kris is going to speak to us about flood forecast operations at the National Weather Service West Gulf River Forecast Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kris Lander. I'm the Development and Operations Hydrologist at the West Gulf River Forecast Center. And today I'm going to tell you about our flood forecasting operations at the National Weather Service West Gulf River Forecast Center in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we generate forecasts and some of the technology that goes into the development of those forecasts, and some of the new tools and techniques that we're using to better inform our partners and decision makers of how high the river is going to get in their forecast area. So the West Gulf RFC area includes everything from Colorado, New Mexico, a good portion of Texas, and a little bit of Louisiana. We deal with a wide variety of water resources issues, everything from snowpack and snowmelt, water supply, decision support, all the way to tropical cyclones, storm surge, and coastal flooding. Major tropical storms such as Hurricane Harvey and Imelda have caused some significant impacts in our area. In addition, we have international border issues to deal with in terms of water allocation. We coordinate with the International Boundary and Water Commission that coordinates the water allocation between the U.S. and Mexico. We also have complex reservoir operations that we deal with in partnership with the Corps of Engineers and the various river authorities that exist within the state of Texas. We've also got complex hill country hydrology that occurs in what is known as flash flood alley, where we have incredibly rapid river responses that occur and some very damaging and devastating flash flooding that occurs in this hill country area. Top that off with various cycles of flood and extreme drought. Texas pretty much has every water resource issue that exists in our forecast area. Well, these photos here show a view of our operations floor, and this is what our office looks like, and it has been set up with lots of monitors and lots of collaborative workstations, as you can see here. The shot below shows a view of our office during Hurricane Harvey, and you can see that almost every one of those seats is occupied as we work through that major event. So how do we create flood forecasts and what goes into a river forecast? Well, it starts at the very beginning with estimating the amount of rain that has fallen onto the ground. So we have some methods in place to create quantitative precipitation estimates and kind of quantify the volume of rainfall that has already fallen up to the current time. In addition, we'll combine that with a rainfall forecast. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, we have a 3-day forecast rainfall example in that slide. And this is where the most uncertainty comes into play into a river forecasting operation. Getting that 3-day or that future rainfall forecast correct means everything in your ability to provide, or our ability to provide, a valid future flood forecast. The soil conditions tell us how wet or dry the situation is and determine the amount of runoff that may occur within our area. In addition, we'll work with the reservoir operators to incorporate their plan for lake releases into our forecasts. All those factors combine to create the river forecast that is published on a government webpage known as the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service. In addition, we'll also work with our weather forecast office partners to issue flood warnings. So how do we come up with the precipitation estimates that we use within our modeling system? Well, we combine the best available radar gauge and satellite precipitation to produce a 4x4 kilometer spatial resolution product that we know as the best estimate multi-sensor field precipitation product. Currently, we use an existing product that's created through a process known as MRMS, and that is the basis or the starting point for us to use a quality control process that gauge corrects the MRMS product and brings in the latest available gauge and precipitation information. We've got forecasters that look at this data hour by hour and do quality control of the precipitation inputs. That quality control data is then input into our model. This is a high quality product, and it is the best available precipitation estimate that is used for our forecasting and modeling process. The precipitation forecast that we use within our model comes from the Weather Prediction Center. Typically in our river forecast, we use approximately 24 hours of precipitation, although we do extend that or possibly reduce that based on the situation. If we've got a well-behaved tropical storm or a very predictable high confidence event, then we might extend beyond 24 to something like 72 hours. However, for most cases, we use 24 hours in our river forecast. Our hydrologic model is known as the Sacramento Soil Moisture Accounting Model. This is the core of our modeling system, and it attempts to model the water content that exists within the soil column. We have an upper zone and a lower zone model. And through this model, we keep a continuous balance of the soil moisture content within the basins that we forecast for. We're continuously inputting precipitation into this model and calculating an evapotranspiration parameter to take water out of the model and dry it out. In addition, we're allowing the model to drain and lose flow as infiltration, surface runoff, and interflow, and also base flow into lower parts of the model itself. When we have heavy rainfall events, the model computes direct runoff, and that is what drives most of the flooding and most of the hydrograph response that we see and that is observed within the basin as flooding. This model relies on unit hydrograph theory and is a lump model, which means that it attempts to lump the parameters from a large area into a single modeling unit. We take the direct runoff that is translated through a unit hydrograph and route that flow downstream using various routing techniques. Most of the time we're using a lag K technique to change the peak and the timing of the hydrograph as it moves downstream. Our model attempts to simulate physical process, but it is a conceptual model and it isn't perfect and requires some correction as we work through the modeling process. Now, the Sacramento model is a component of the community hydrologic prediction system. On this plot here, you can see an example of what a forecaster sees after they run the model. This shows some of the flow routing components of our model for a forecast segment. And on the left, you can see an example of what a forecaster uses to interact with the model. Now, the way we run our model and the way we forecast, we never accept the model at face value. We always try to adjust the model or nudge the model in the direction we think it needs to be nudged. Models are always wrong, they're never right, but they can be close to right, and the skill of the forecaster is required to nudge that model in the right direction towards the best possible forecast. So our forecasters will get in and do things like modify the amount of runoff that might be generated from the model. They might change the rainfall input. They might change the unit hydrograph timing. There's a million different things that we can change within this model. It's highly configurable, highly adjustable, and very adaptable to make very quick and on-the-fly decisions that meet the current situation. We have to be able to get a good answer out quickly in order to meet the needs of our emergency managers. So here's an example of a river forecast that we produced. This was a plot that is created for all of our river forecasting points and published on water.weather.gov on the main Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service website. And you can see on this plot we've got a blue time series, which is the past observed. We've got a future time series, which is the forecast. We've got stage and we've got flow. And we've got several categories of impacts. We've got action, minor, moderate, and major flood stage. And so this is the context for how we deliver information to the users of our forecast products. And here's an example of how a forecast evolves. You can see for this situation here, this was during Hurricane Harvey. We've got a 46.7 foot crest forecast on the San Bernard that extends way beyond the current forecast period of 5 days. It's going to be up above record for at least that long. And so you can kind of watch this evolve over time. You can see the blue time series grow and track the forecast. And you can see us update the forecast and adjust the forecast for new information that comes into play as we attempt to determine how much flow is routing downstream in this river and how much flow is accumulated in terms of runoff. Now here we are close to the crest. Then this is the primary tool by which we use to communicate the forecast to our user base. And all this has to be done in fairly rapid succession. You know, we have to have an answer no matter what. Even if it's not the perfect answer, we're on the clock. We're racing the clock all the way through this process, trying to come up with the best possible answer within the amount of time that we're given to produce a forecast. So in the end, we have to provide a number, and we have to tell the level of certainty or level of confidence we have with the forecast. That's a very important component to communicate, especially when we get into major to record territory with our forecast. You can see this forecast being above record was a high impact forecast, and so we are working through our weather forecast office in our partnership with them to talk about impacts, what we think is going to happen in an area, so that the folks that make the emergency management decisions have the best available confidence information and impact information that we can possibly give them. So when they make their decisions to respond to the flood event, whether that is to do rescues or make evacuations or develop evacuation orders, they can have some degree of confidence that the decision that they're making is the right decision. So once we've run our model and we've produced a forecast, we have to get the message out. And that goes beyond just the outlet that I've described of using the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service to publish a forecast hydrograph on the web. We use NOAA hazards radio. We have various social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, that we use to get the message out. We also rely heavily on our media partners to help us publish forecasts, get the word out that areas are going to be impacted by flooding, and that the folks that watch those media channels need to be aware that flooding is occurring or imminent in their area. So our partnership with the media and the other weather industry folks is critical in order to help us get the message out and amplify that message. Forecast decision support, that is also a big part of our mission. And what you're seeing here is the operations floor at the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Texas Department of Emergency Management. And these folks during an event are making very high stakes decisions that are intended to protect life and property, and they're doing their best to allocate resources and drive the response to the flood events that we get involved in. And so oftentimes we'll send somebody to work in this center to do forecast decision support. And so this is the view from the chair of the person that was deployed in this office at the time to provide decision support. They'll do briefings, answer questions, and just be there as a resource to this group when they're trying to position their resources or decide what they need to do in response to an event. And the questions can be fairly intense at times. We tell them what we know, and we always, again, have to provide some level of confidence or uncertainty with any forecast information that we provide so they can make the best decision that they can possibly make. Now, in this slide, I'm showing you one of the primary tools, probably the most important tool that we use for forecast decision support, the phone. This piece of archaic technology has been around for at least 100 years, and we still use it in our office. Not everything's chat or web now. We actually do use the phone as our primary tool for communication and forecast decision support. Our partners want briefings quite frequently, so that's a big component of being able to provide decision support, is being able to provide them with briefings, or just one-on-one advice on where we think the rain is going to fall, how much runoff we're seeing generated above a reservoir, all sorts of little issues. They want some insight into what we're seeing within our modeling system so that they can be better informed with their decision making. Also, we do a lot of graphics and a lot of briefings. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of graphics that we've put together to help other folks that may not have a background in meteorology or in hydrologic forecasting understand what the potential impacts are going to be of a major tropical event. So here's an example of a hurricane graphic. Here's a QPF impact graphic that describes the amount of rainfall that's being forecast at this point in time for Hurricane Harvey. And this last graphic is done in bold red with kind of an idea that we're going to use that color to grab people's attention. Okay, things are really, really bad now. We're even going to change the color of our slide. And to emphasize that we are in a catastrophic flooding situation. So again, in addition to being forecasters and scientists, we also have to be communication experts. And this is, in some respects, one of the most challenging parts of the job, is trying to figure out how to take this huge volume of information that you're producing in your office in terms of model runs and results, and turn it into impacts and tangible pieces of information that people can understand and take action on. Now I'll get into one of the new tools that we use to help provide some guidance with the uncertainty that I mentioned earlier. Again, trying to quantify uncertainty is one of the biggest challenges that we have as forecasters. And it exists in various forms. There are uncertainties associated with the forcings that go into the model, with the precipitation estimates and with the forecast quantitative precipitation estimates that go into the model. And so there's a set of forcings uncertainty that is fed into the model. There's also modeling uncertainty, just the model itself. There are inherent biases within the model just in the way it was calibrated, the way it operates. It has strengths and weaknesses. It may not do well in high flow situations. Maybe it does excellent in high flow situations and does terrible in low flows. It may not do well with recessions, or it may have strengths or weaknesses in forecasting rises. This can all be quantified. And so we have a process to do that, a set of techniques known as the Hydrologic Ensemble Forecast Service, or HEFS. And the goal of this is to put a number to and quantify the total uncertainty in flow, the forcing uncertainty, and the hydrologic uncertainty. So in order to do that, we have a set of processes that run pretty complicated scenarios based on ensemble-based forecasts involving our GEFS model, the climate forecast system, and general climatology through a meteorological ensemble forecast processor, and that helps us correct any forcing bias that might exist and determine and quantify the uncertainty associated with the ensembles. Also, our ensemble post processor in ONS post, that does bias flow correction to help us determine what the uncertainty of the model might be within a particular area. Again, it goes through the strengths and weaknesses and creates a statistical model of the spread of the basically the model uncertainty. And this is all tied into our hydrologic model, the CHIPS model, Community Hydrologic Prediction Service model. And the bias-corrected ensemble flow forecasts come out the other side of this and are used in various National Weather Service and external user applications. Some people want us to provide a set of ensembles that they can work with in their own model, and some folks just want to look at a graphic. But here's an example of what that graphic looks like. So here is an example of a 10-day HEFS forecast for Chambers Creek at Rice, and the data here shows the various confidence envelopes that have been computed for this Chambers Creek at Rice location. And here you see a 95 to 5% or least possible confidence envelope, a 10 to 90% in the green. This is the median, or the likely confidence envelope, and the most likely range is between 25 to 75% here, and then the median is the blue time series. So we can use this type of technique to create confidence envelopes and get a sense of what the uncertainty with a particular forecast is. The National Water Model is another tool that the West Gulf River Forecast Center uses when generating a hydrologic forecast. This model was developed and is maintained by the National Water Center and the Office of Water Prediction in the National Weather Service. And it is a CONUS-wide model that incorporates forecasting technology for 2.7 million river reaches across the forecast CONUS area. The advantage to using this is it is continuous, whereas the West Gulf River Forecast Center model only has forecasts available at specific forecast points and is a lumped model that only provides forecasts at those specific points. The National Water Model is a continuous distributed type model that provides forecasts for virtually all river reaches across the U.S., even locations where stream gauges are not present or do not exist. This gives us the ability to interpret this model and compare the model against our current operational forecast system. So I'm going to show you how we use and compare the National Water Model short, medium, and long-range forecasts against our lump model forecasts that we produce in our office for this location at the Trinity River at Dallas, and talk a little bit about the model performance and some of the differences between our forecasts and the water model forecasts. So it's important to have more than one point of reference, and that's why we want to compare model results. Models are never completely right, and they have strengths and weaknesses. In this case, the National Water Model is using a completely different precipitation forcing data set than what we're using for our model in terms of past and future precip. So it's important to know that and to know the strengths and weaknesses of the model and generally how it performs. So it's run in a little bit different way, has a different set of strengths and weaknesses, and we're learning how to read those, interpret those, and use those in combination with our forecast model to create the best possible forecast product. So here's an example. You've got the short range model that is in the green time series. You've got the medium range model that is in the orange time series, and then you have our operational lump model that is kind of the pink and blue time series overlapping. And then the long range model is this pink hash time series here that's shown along the bottom. And this is time zero, and what you see here in the past is some of the observed model runs and observed gauge observations at this location. And so what I want you to notice is, number one, the duration of the forecasts. The water model forecasts go out longer, so the longer duration goes out many more days than our current operational forecast, goes out at least 10 days. Our medium range National Water Model run goes out at least 10 days, and ours is cut off here at 5 days. And then this short range water model run only goes out to about 18 hours. So it's a short duration model, but it's updated more frequently. So as we move closer to the peak, you can see that the hourly run, when we get really close to the peak, is producing about a 16,000 CFS discharge in terms of a peak, and then the lump model is somewhere below that. And here we are past the crest, and it actually, one of the water model runs actually absolutely nailed the time series, or got the timing completely right, although it wasn't able to detect it as far in advance as the model that we run in the office. So using all three of these models together, the short range water model, the medium range, and the current model in our office, we're able to get a better picture of what might happen as an event progresses using an ensemble of models, leveraging the strengths and weaknesses that are known between the different types of models that exist. And you can see kind of the end of the event as things wind down. So the way that we communicate our flood forecasts is also in a state of evolution. The forecast hydrograph on the left that you've heard me talk a lot about today, this is kind of the old way of doing things. It shows you what's going to happen. It does relate some impacts to the forecast crest. It does convey timing information, but it doesn't really tell you what's going to happen. We've tried to tell what's going to happen in terms of stage-based text information that's associated with these forecast stages. However, that still doesn't show you what's going to happen. And what people really want from us in terms of what's actually going to happen is a map. They want us to show you the actual forecast impacts on a map. They want a flood inundation map. And so we've been working in this arena for quite some time, producing one-off static inundation maps that are associated with the forecast hydrograph and publishing flood forecast information related to the gauge. However, we don't have a comprehensive, seamless set of forecast inundation maps that spans the gap from gauge to gauge. We haven't worked on that until now. And that is kind of where we're headed as an agency, and even as federal agency, is being able to fill the gap and provide mapping information and the best available mapping information at multiple locations throughout a a river area that's flood impacted so that the decision makers can decide what areas they need to worry about, if it's a road closure or a... This graphic shows a conceptual forecast product that uses the hand or height above nearest drainage mapping technique. The process to develop this model was created by the University of Texas and has been implemented by the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This mapping product is designed to span the gap between river forecast points. This provides information to emergency managers on where the relevant impacts might be. This is not the same thing as an engineering scale hydrologic model. It was set up in a slightly different way. It's more of an approximate method type technique. However, it does convey some pretty important information about the flood impacts that may occur within this area. We're currently working with the Water Center on a plan to deploy this in terms of a product that we can use to brief our core partners on what the flood impacts might be within the forecast area. This serves or will serve as an important backbone to the flood inundation mapping process and can be combined with additional higher resolution or engineering scale models to give a best possible and complete picture of what the inundation scenario might be. That concludes my presentation for today, and thank you very much, and I'll look forward to your questions in the question and answer session.
Thanks so much for your great presentation, Kris. That was very interesting, for me at least, to learn a lot about all of the complexities that go into forecasting, and then all of the challenges that you have with using that information to make decisions, or rather communicating that information to those who will be making the decisions. So that is a very complex task. We do have time for just one or two questions. And the first one that we have is, how do you measure or estimate evapotranspiration?
So the technique that we use is the Penman method, and it is it's calculated in real time. We just do a daily estimate based on some meteorological parameters, wind run and solar radiation, that sort of thing. But it's calculated daily on a daily time step.
Okay. Then you mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation that getting that 3-day forecast right is really important for the rest. What would you say are the main driving sources of the uncertainty in getting that right?
You know, in Texas, we have all kinds of meteorological forcing issues with getting our quantitative precipitation forcing predictions right. And it's just a matter of where the storm sets up. We know at times that it's going to rain and somebody's going to get a heck of a lot of rain. They're going to get 10 inches somewhere, but we can't dial in the precise location. And the way our basins are shaped in Texas, sometimes if you put 10 inches 30 miles west, you're going to end up flooding a completely different river basin. It could be the Colorado Basin instead of the Brazos. So knowing the placement and the amount and the timing all together and being able to dial that in is critical for being able to provide an accurate forecast.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all we have for questions so far. So thanks again, Kris, for your presentation, and we hope to see you in Raleigh next year, or virtually if it's virtual.
Thank you.
All right, then last up, but not least, we have a presentation from Priscilla Scruggs and Lisa Massano. Priscilla works for FEMA. She's the Director of Communications and Management Division. Their presentation is titled Empowering Local Officials to Talk Flood Risk, Stories from Year 1 of the Flood Risk Communication Toolkit and Videos Rollout. Take it away, Priscilla.
Hello, my name is Priscilla Scruggs. I am the Director of the Communications and Management Division in the Risk Management Directorate in the Federal Insurance Administration of FEMA. And last year we launched the Flood Risk Community Toolkit, which is a suite of tools developed to empower community officials to talk about flood risk. We debuted the toolkit at a session the ASFPM conference in Cleveland, Ohio. This year, we want to brief you on what has happened since then and a little bit about how the toolkit has been used. So in Cleveland, we held a workshop on the toolkit and its elements, and we played the toolkit's videos at the FEMA booth. This was the first event in a strategic rollout that was designed to inspire champions who would use these resources to communicate and address flood risk. Today's presentation will provide an introduction and background to the Flood Risk Communications Toolkit and videos for those of you who haven't seen it, address how these resources connect to the National Mitigation Investment Strategy, and share some stories about how these resources are being used to advance conversations about flood risk in a number of communities. But first, some background on how we got here. FEMA recognized that it must balance its focus on outcomes with its community's desire for a positive customer experience to achieve its overall mission. The initial findings revealed a significant opportunity to improve the customer experience. As FEMA moved forward and examined and collaborated with stakeholders about the flood mapping portion of the NFIP journey, we identified several key gaps related to the customer experience. 1, products are challenging for non-technical audiences. 2, the products are not easily tailored, have little support for low capability communities, and are not flexible enough to allow high capability communities to exceed FEMA standards. 3, the process is lengthy and burdensome for communities and expensive for everyone. And finally, the lack of transparency and engagement leaves communities feeling that the process is done to them, not with them. To address these gaps, FEMA engaged regional and headquarters staff, as well as communities on their perspectives. We involved a lot of people, 13 headquarters participants, 30 regional participants from all 10 regions, and 76 representatives from 58 communities, just to name some. FEMA and communities agree on 4 goals that will directly address identified pain points for the customer. 1, more useful products and for non-technical experts. An active community role in defining the process. A faster process. And transparency of the process for communities. The toolkit is helping FEMA deliver on its promise to provide simpler, more consistent experiences for its customers. We understand that many communities need help tackling the complex topic of risk communication. To answer this need, the toolkit was developed to aid community officials in their outreach to their stakeholders. The toolkit is designed to make risk communication easier for community officials and improve the overall quality of their engagement with the public. In creation of the materials, we worked with industry experts and shared several of the toolkit components with community representatives nationally as we went along to collect feedback and confirm the element's usefulness. The toolkit is not prescriptive. It is intended instead to empower users to become partners in the effort to create more resilient homes and communities. Throughout the flood mapping process, FEMA works with local community officials. These tools were designed to bolster the abilities of local officials as you take the baton in the relay to communicate flood risk to the public. Because we believe a public informed about flood risk and inspired to take action is a public on the path to resilience. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to tell you a little bit more about the details of the toolkit.
Thank you, Priscilla. I'm going to talk about the components of the toolkit, which includes the video series, and we're going to play a little video clip for you. The components start with a start guide, and this is something that orients users to all of the other components, and it also provides some tips on complex how to communicate complex risk topics in a meaningful way. And the communication plan guide is seen as the second component, in that if starting with the stool guide, the start guide, I'm going to start over. Okay. Thank you, Priscilla. I'm going to talk through the toolkit components, beginning with the start guide. The start guide introduces users to each of the components and provides helpful tips for discussing complex risk topics in a meaningful way. The second guide in the series is a communication plan guide, and this lays out a 7-step process that walks community officials through designing a plan that's focused on the desired outcomes and based on what is most important to their community. Developing a communication plan is a strategic step that you can take to communicate about natural hazards to protect the people and the things most valued in your community. The remaining guides and components that you're seeing on the screen include the video series and can be used collectively or independent of each other to support your community's flood risk communication needs. We know that storytelling works better than fact sharing alone to motivate behavioral change, and that it takes more than data and facts, and sometimes it takes experience to move people to take action. Studies also show that the use of videos allows for a more efficient processing of information and memory recall. So this video series took all of that into mind. It allows viewers to process the information that's shared in these videos in a way that's natural to them, in a way that they'll recall. The YouTube video series includes 8 2- to 4-minute videos that showcase personal stories from around the country that communicate technical information in a relatable manner. We'll play a clip of the flood risk basics and communities video for those who haven't had a chance to see the video series on the next screen.
From Marcus, Texas, a close call in 2015 prompted the Rand family to learn more about their flood risk. The water had come to our door. We did not get flood damage, but it was down to the wire. The house is full of so many memories, and I cannot imagine what it would feel like to lose all of this. In terms of how the house is raised right now, we are currently about 8.5 feet up in the air. The reason we were really emphatic that we wanted to go this height is we met with the city engineer who showed us the flood elevation map. Floodplains are typically low-lying areas that carry and disperse water. Flood risk is dynamic, and everyone has some form of risk. Flood risk is informed by flood hazards in your area, such as storms, changing weather patterns, development, and sometimes changes to the landscape. These and other hazards can be dangerous for people and property. So to determine flood risk, officials must consider the following. How likely is it to happen? How often does it happen? And how bad could it be?
What you're seeing on the screen now is a guide that was developed following the release of the videos, because we really received a lot of feedback that it would be helpful to have some sort of a cheat sheet that walked viewers through the different topics, the so what of the video, when to share the video during a flood risk project, some featured topics, and some ideas for additional engagement. This front back 2-pager can be found in the library with the rest of the toolkit components on FEMA.gov, and Priscilla will share that location later in this presentation. And I'll hand it back to you, Priscilla.
Thank you, Lisa. So I just want to take a moment to talk about the National Mitigation Investment Strategy. Last year, the National Mitigation Investment Strategy was released, and the timing could not have been better because the toolkit aligns well with recommendation 1.2 of the investment strategy. The recommendation calls for, quote, the federal government and non-federal partners to create a more accessible inventory of available resources for mitigation-related training and education. These should be resources for people who work outside of the federal government and should include train the trainer materials to expand reach and impact, The federal government should work with non-federal partners to make sure resources for the whole community reflect emerging needs and changing demands, end quote. Just want to point out the toolkit checks all of those boxes and puts this recommendation in action. And I just wanted to make sure we noted that point. I'm going to hand the microphone back to Lisa to talk about the stories and best practices from rollout activities over the past year.
Thank you. With this slide, we want to talk about keeping up the beat, like how we continued the rollout of this toolkit so that it was strategically rolled out and kept at top of mind through publications, train the trainer, workshop opportunities, both online and in person, including webinars and a number of mapping related meetings. There were more than 8,500 views of the videos in the first 9 months since they were posted on the FEMA YouTube channel last June. And in that same period of time, I'm sorry, I'm going to start over. With this slide, we want to talk about all that we've been doing since last May to keep up the beat and continue the rollout. Since last May, through a series of publications and online and in-person trainings and meetings, we've kept up the beat to keep these topics and tools in the hands of community officials. There were more than 8,500 views of the videos in the first 9 months since the video series posted on FEMA's YouTube channel. And in that same period of time, the toolkit was introduced to more than 850 individuals at 6 conferences, 3 workshops, and 12 mapping-related meetings, including state partner conferences in November. There were flood risk toolkit webinars for all 4 states, state CTPs and FEMA Region 7 earlier this year. And we've also presented the toolkit and videos at floodplain management conferences in California, Maryland, Virginia, and Florida, as well as the Social Coast Forum that NOAA hosts in February every other year. So the toolkits and videos have been played at several mapping related meetings in FEMA Regions 3, 4, 5, and 10, including open house meetings in Pinellas County, Florida, following the release of the preliminary maps. The videos, a subset of the videos were played on a loop as people entered the area before the meeting started. And over a 2-week period, about 750 people total attended 3 separate meetings. So an average of 250 people were at each meeting, and these videos were a way to introduce complex topics that maybe some people had never had exposure to before in a plain language way, in a way that could, in a storytelling approach. The full suite of tools were rolled out in the states that have asterisks next to their names here on the slide. And we'll discuss on the next 4 slides some of the details of how that full suite has been rolled out. Starting with cooperating technical partners training that took place at EMI in late August last year. There were 19 CTP representatives that participated in a 2-hour workshop specifically about the toolkit. And the facilitators at that training used a scavenger hunt exercise to engage the participants in watching some of the videos and paging through some of the guides to respond to several questions. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for the toolkit and how easy the information was to follow and digest. There was a lot of praise for the plain language aspect of these resources. And they also really enjoyed watching the videos throughout the week and brainstorming how communities could use them. Following the workshop, one CTP said they were thinking about approaching local media to air the videos. And there were also requests to have the materials translated into Spanish, as well as requests for videos to include additional geographies and regions, including a request to consider a video for a flood after wildfire. We welcome these ideas, and FEMA plans to continue to add to the toolkit. So if you have ideas or suggestions, please do tell your FEMA regional representative or anyone that you have contact with to consider adding to this toolkit. Another opportunity was to schedule a train the trainer with the FEMA regional counterparts to have, everyone rolled up their sleeves and dug into the different toolkit components. Based on the insights and experiences gained during that training, each participant left with their own call to action. And some of what we heard, some of the plans that we heard were that people plan to use the toolkit to help onboard new staff who were new to the mapping program. We also heard that there were plans to use the toolkit with response recovery and post-disaster peers to discuss how using these resources would help make disasters less disastrous. There were plans to practice keeping messages clear, concise, and customer-centric, which is a primary goal of this toolkit, is to put the customer at the center and really think about what's going to help them to understand the mapping process and the actions they can take. Everyone left that training with a commitment to keep up the beat and to continue to roll out the toolkit when they got back to their regions and in working with their states and their community representatives. We also heard some great analogies, including every hour you spend reading the toolkit is 6 hours saved trying to find the information online, or the toolkit is like a PIO in a box. On this slide, we want to talk a little bit about the state CTP webinars that Region 7 held earlier this year in January and February with all 4 of their states. And more specifically, we want to talk about Nebraska Department of Natural Resources. A common refrain that we've really learned over the past year is that cross-pollination across departments, organizations, divisions, geographies is required to learn about new tools and to discuss different approaches to common issues and to explore new audiences. So this toolkit has really acted as a way to convene people to talk about those very subjects. And as mentioned on a previous slide, Region 7 has done these webinars, and a part of the toolkit is also story maps. Story maps in Nebraska are a main community engagement tool for every risk map project. And one project that has been in the works for a while is a story map developed by the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources that identifies flood risk in the West Fork Big Blue watershed, located in southeastern Nebraska. This is a high priority for the Nebraska DNR because a number of communities in this watershed have a long history of flood damages as well as mitigation activities. Jamie Renke with the DNR was kind enough to film this video testimonial for us to share with you during this presentation.
DNR had a vision for creating story maps to engage our local partners in a more compelling way. Story maps seem to be the ideal platform to grab people's attention using captivating imagery. We were able to use the videos from the Flood Risk Toolkit to bring the story maps to life and to explain critical steps in the risk map process.
I think Jamie does a great job of explaining how story maps are a really excellent tool to use to communicate complex risk topics. And the last slide that I'm going to talk about how some of these resources have been used are in Region 5 for pre-community consultation officer or CCO meeting webinars. There was a Great Lakes study that has been going on up in Region 5, and several maps were rolled out in the states of Michigan and Illinois from August through November of last year. And so we had 6 different webinars with community officials about 2 weeks before their CCO meetings. During those webinars, we talked a few minutes about what to expect from the CCO meeting. We talked a little bit about the background of the Great Lakes Coastal Study, but most importantly, we used that time to make connections between the updated flood risk data and the actions prioritized in the community hazard mitigation plans. Getting back to story maps, they also featured a Granite Falls story map that talked about a journey to resilience and how mitigation action contributed to that journey. The majority of the meetings were spent underscoring how important it is for the community officials to reach out to the public before those public open house meetings and the role that they play in terms of relaying the message of risk and how this toolkit could help them. And what you're seeing on the screen are some of the features, including a flyer that was sent out to the community officials. You can see at the bottom a flood map information open house that was featured on one of the community's websites. And then up on the right, we did some polling during those webinars to learn which platform community officials felt the most comfortable with in terms of sharing with their public. And at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation back to Priscilla.
Thank you, Lisa. So if you're intrigued by what you've heard and you want to access the toolkit, you can find it at its location on the FEMA's risk map page, which is shown here. We continue to add components to the toolkit, so be sure to refresh your bookmarks. And the last slide gives you my contact information in case you want to reach out to me and share your feedback with me. So thank you for joining us in this presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Priscilla and Lisa, for a great presentation. It's really exciting to see all the work that FEMA is doing to help more of us be able to speak about flood risk. There are a lot of complex issues, and it's definitely useful when we have guidance on helping us figure out how to distill those complex issues into digestible bits that we can understand. So thank you very much. We have time for a few questions, and the first one we have is this toolkit that you just described complementary to the risk communication and risk map playbook that Brian and Leslie presented in another session, D4? Are these coordinated efforts?
Yes, the playbook lays out a framework for the types of communications that we do. This toolkit was actually intended for local officials. When the playbook was done first, and it's how we approach engagement. But when we were out with the communities, we got a lot of requests for give us tools from local officials to help communicate these difficult concepts ourselves. And so we wanted to empower our stakeholders. So they really are complementary, and the playbook is used by us and others, but the toolkit is really intended for community officials.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Oh, okay. Oh, what kind of feedback have you been getting from the elected officials?
Yeah, I think Lisa kind of went over it a little bit in the presentation, but we've gotten a lot of positive feedback and even some suggestions for improvement, which we really like because we want this to be as useful as possible and have the biggest impact. So we've gotten a little bit of both, and we love both.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions? I see a note that Lisa is waiting in the Zoom room, but we're in GoToMeeting. I don't have her email to send the link.
I did send it to her, but I don't know.
Okay. Okay, great. How did you decide what topics you're going to make the videos about?
Usually based on where we had a lot of frequently asked questions or topics that our regional staff said were difficult to convey. People had a lot of trouble, and so that's how we kind of prioritize what to pick. And a little bit of what resonated most with us as well.
Okay, got it. Great. Do we have any other questions? Let me see if there came any on the chat list. All right, I don't see anything else from the audience.
Yes,
oh, it looks like Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Can you hear us?
Lisa, are you on mute? Can you hear us?
Can you hear us? Okay. Slight technical difficulties, but thanks everyone for bearing with us. There's always a couple of glitches when we do something like this, a virtual conference for the first time. So, we have a question from Terry. She said, is this a public-facing set of resources versus the CERC playbook?
Yes. Okay. Very much public-facing. It's on our website, on our public website, and available for the public to use or download as they please. So yes.
Okay, great. And we have one final question that says, this is awesome. Can you please share any future plans or ideas that you have for the toolkit?
Lisa, can you hear us? Can you answer that one?
Yeah, I couldn't get the computer working, but I'm on my phone. Hi.
You're here.
Good to see you, Jessica.
Nice to see you.
So
I didn't hear the question though. Sorry.
future plans for updating the toolkit.
Okay, yeah, we've been keeping a list, and actually we just completed a message guide that's about to go to FEMA External Affairs. So that is going to be part of the toolkit and should be in that same folder with all the other guides soon. And that breaks it out by elected officials, the public, and more like community champions. So, and we'll continue to add as we get ideas and have scope to do that.
That's so exciting. Okay.
The videos too. I know we work with Peter Herrick on this, and there's a lot of interest in doing videos for other geographies and other topics. So we've, in those meetings with Region 7 that we talked about, there are several ideas that came out of those meetings. So, you know, to really get at places that aren't coastal or, you know, some of what you saw in the geography or what you'll see in the geographies and the videos.
Great. Anything else from the audience? Okay. It looks like that's all for the questions. Big thanks again to Lisa and Priscilla, and to all of our panelists, to Kris and Witold. This was a great session, and thank you all very much for participating in ASFPM this year, and we hope to see you again next year.
Thank you, Jessica. Bye-bye.
Thank you.